The Westfield Meridian Mall on a Thursday afternoon in late November smelled like cinnamon sugar and floor wax, and the particular kind of exhaustion that belongs to parents doing their best. Ethan Cole noticed it all. He always did. He noticed the emergency exit near the food court's eastern wall, the one with the push bar handle that had been repainted recently, meaning the latch mechanism was probably stiff from the new coat. He noticed the security camera mounted above the Sparrow counter that had a 15-degree blind spot because someone had angled it too far left when they installed the replacement unit 3 months ago. He noticed the couple near the fountain arguing in low, tight voices, the teenager near the pretzel kiosk who kept touching his jacket pocket every 40 seconds, the older man sitting alone at a table with no food in front of him, reading a newspaper that hadn't turned a page in 11 minutes. He noticed all of it the way other men noticed weather passively, automatically, without deciding to. Dad. 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 Lily's fingers were wrapped around 3 of his, tugging with the full commitment of a 7-year-old who had located something important. I see it, Ethan said. You don't even know what I'm pointing at. The ice cream place with the pink sign. She stopped tugging, looked up at him with enormous brown eyes. How did you know? You always find the pink signs first. Lily considered this as though it were a philosophical observation worth sitting with, then resumed walking, not tugging now, just pulling gently, like guiding a large, slow animal she had grown fond of. She wore a yellow wool coat with toggles instead of buttons because she'd gone through a phase 3 months ago of being unable to manage buttons without frustration, and Ethan had quietly bought 4 yellow toggle coats in different sizes for the next 4 years. That was how he loved her, not loudly. Ahead of the problem. Can I get the one with the sprinkles on top? What kind of sprinkles? All of them. That's not a flavor. Dad, the sprinkles go on top of the flavor. They're a separate decision. He almost smiled. It reached the corner of his mouth and stopped there, which for Ethan Cole was the equivalent of a full grin. He steered them toward the ice cream counter, keeping Lily on his left, his dominant side clear. Body naturally angled to the room rather than away from it. The food court was crowded, but not dangerously so. 40, maybe 45 people across the main seating area. 3 entry points, 2 service corridors that staff used, 1 elevator bank that opened onto the level above. On the level above, through the glass rail that overlooked the food court, a woman stood with a phone pressed to her ear and her free hand moving in quick, precise gestures at a man beside her. The gestures were not random. They were American Sign Language fluid, economical, the movements of someone who had been signing for decades rather than years. Ethan didn't watch her. He was watching the pretzel teenager and recalibrating the pocket touching to anxiety rather than concealment. The rhythm was wrong for concealment. Too visible, seeking self-soothing rather than checking presence. He ordered a small vanilla for himself and let Lily stand at the glass case for 3 full minutes, choosing her sprinkle configuration. He used those 3 minutes to complete a full sweep of the room. Everything was ordinary. Almost. On the level above, Ava Reynolds was finishing the worst video call of her month, which was saying something because it had been a month that included a vendor lawsuit, a board resignation, and a HVAC failure that had shut down her company's primary server room for 4 hours. I understand the concern, Gerald, she said, in the particular tone she used for board members who confused volume with insight. What I'm telling you is that the timeline hasn't changed. What's changed is your comfort level with it, and that's a separate conversation. She was 34 years old and had been running Meridian Systems for 3 years. Before that, she'd spent 6 years as a security architecture consultant, which was how she'd come to learn American Sign Language. Her first major client had been a deaf entrepreneur who'd grown tired of accommodating everyone else's communication preferences. Ava had decided, on principle, that she would do the accommodating. She'd taken classes for 8 months. She'd been fluent for 5 years. Her assistant, Daniel, stood 3 feet away with a tablet and the expression of someone trying very hard to be invisible. She signed to him while she talked. Push the Hargrove call to 4. Tell procurement I need the Reinhold numbers before I land Friday. Daniel signed back. Hargrove will complain. She signed. Hargrove complains about gravity. Schedule it anyway. She shifted her position along the glass rail, not intending to look down into the food court, simply moving away from the glare near the elevator bank. and her eyes passed across the crowd below, with the same professional detachment she brought to everything. The crowd was ordinary. Families, couples, the ambient motion of consumerism, except for one man standing near the eastern entrance who wasn't moving the way everyone else was moving. Ava's call continued. Gerald was explaining something about liability. She wasn't fully listening to Gerald anymore. The man below was standing in the natural flow of foot traffic without participating in it. His hoodie was gray, unremarkable. His hands were in his pockets, but the way he was standing angled slightly toward the seating area rather than any particular store or exit was the posture of someone who had selected a position, not arrived at one accidentally. She'd spent 6 years evaluating security environments. She knew what waiting looked like from the outside. She knew what choosing a position looked like. She knew what target identification looked like. Her hand moved without her consciously deciding to sign. He has a weapon. Daniel looked up, looked down at the food court, looked back at her with a question on his face. Ava kept her eyes on the man in gray. No one down there had noticed anything. The families kept eating. The children kept running between tables. The noise of the food court continued unchanged. 100 small conversations creating the texture of normal life, undisturbed. No one had seen her sign. She was certain of it. And then a man at the ice cream counter, tall, dark jacket. A little girl beside him, eating something with considerable dedication, turned his head. Not toward the man in gray. That would have been too obvious. He turned toward the elevator bank, toward the upper level, toward her, and his eyes found hers with the directness of someone who had already found what he was looking for. He had seen her sign. He had understood it. For 3 seconds, they simply looked at each other across 30 feet of air and 1 floor of distance. And something passed between them that required none of the words either of them was capable of saying in that moment. Then he looked back down at his daughter and said something quiet. The little girl kept eating her ice cream, and the man in the dark jacket began to move. Ethan had identified the man in gray 12 minutes before Ava signed anything. He had clocked him at the eastern entrance when they first came in a peripheral register. Nothing confirmed, just a thread that he'd kept hold of without examining directly. The man had been standing near a store that sold phone cases, not looking at phone cases. That happened. People waited for people. People zoned out. But 12 minutes was a long time to stand near a phone case store without looking at a phone case. Ethan had bought Lily's ice cream, found a table with good sight lines, and spent the next 6 minutes tracking the man without appearing to track him. The tells accumulated. The man's weight was forward on his toes. Not always he corrected it, which meant he was aware of his own stance, which meant he had training of some kind, which meant the correction itself was a tell. His right hand stayed in his hoodie pocket while his left moved naturally. Dominant hand secured. Not casual. His eyes moved in a pattern. Not the organic scatter of someone people watching or bored. There was an interval. 3 seconds. Sweep. Return. An interval that suggested he was looking for something specific and checking repeatedly for it. And he had not looked at the food. In a food court, over 12 minutes, a person waiting for a friend would look at the food. The smell alone made it automatic. This man had not glanced once at any of the surrounding counters. Ethan had been keeping all of this in a quiet compartment at the back of his mind. When Lily tugged him back toward the ice cream case, for the important matter of whether rainbow sprinkles or chocolate sprinkles were structurally superior. It was while he was standing at the case that he saw the movement above. He wasn't looking at the upper level. He was looking at the eastern entrance in his peripheral vision, monitoring the man in gray. But the upper level was in his field of view. And the movement up there was distinct enough to register. Hands moving in American Sign Language. He brought his eyes up without moving his head. A woman at the rail. Professional bearing. A phone at her ear. She was signing to someone beside her, and the sign she'd made, clear as a sentence spoken aloud to anyone who knew the language, was, "He has a weapon." She was looking at the man in gray. She saw it too. Ethan let his eyes find hers. She'd already found his. She was the kind of person who noticed when someone's attention moved, which told him something important about her. Their eyes met for 3 seconds, He needed one. He looked back down at Lily. "Okay, Bug," he said. "Big decision. I need you to make it fast." Lily, who understood tone if not content, looked up from the glass case. Her eyes were serious. Children were better at reading faces than adults remembered. "Rainbow or chocolate?" she said. "Rainbow," he said. "Take it back to the table. Sit between the big column and the counter. Not near the open part. Don't move until I come back. Are you going somewhere? Just for a minute. Is something wrong?" He looked at her. He didn't lie to Lily. He had made that decision when she was 3, and he was still figuring out what kind of father he was going to be, and he had not deviated from it since. "There might be," he said. "So I need you to do exactly what I said. Can you do that?" She was 7. She had inherited his eyes, his stillness, and, apparently, his ability to receive information without requiring it to be padded in comfort. She looked at him for a moment, measuring something. "Yes," she said. "Good girl." He watched her walk to the table he'd indicated the column would provide cover on one side, the counter staff on the other, and sit down with her ice cream and her back to the wall, the way he'd been unconsciously teaching her to do for 3 years. Then he turned and began to move. He did not call security. This was not because he didn't consider it. He considered everything. But calling security meant raising his phone, which meant his attention was visibly divided. Which meant if the man in gray was watching for threat response, and he was, that much was clear from the eye pattern, the alert would be detected, and the timeline would compress. He did not shout. Shouting in a crowded food court with 45 civilians between him and the threat was not a strategy. It was a chaos generator. Crowd movement was unpredictable. People ran toward exits or toward the sound. Children got separated. Someone fell. The man in gray would have a second's advantage in all of that noise, and 1 second was enough. He did not walk toward the man directly. He moved at an oblique angle, not toward the threat, but to a position that would allow approach from the man's peripheral blind side. He timed it against the natural movement of the crowd. He used the foot traffic the way water used a riverbed, following the path of least resistance, so he generated no visual interruption in the overall motion of the space. The man in gray was still in his selected position. Still scanning. 3 seconds. Sweep. Return. Ethan put himself in the gap between sweeps and kept moving. He was aware, at the edges of his attention, that the woman from the upper rail had moved. He could see her in his peripheral vision now. She'd come down somehow, fast, and was standing near the elevator bank on the food court level. She was still on her phone. But she wasn't talking. She was watching him. He didn't look at her. He was 12 feet away from the man in gray. The man's right hand shifted in his pocket. Not a nervous fidget. A specific adjustment. The kind that preceded retrieval. Ethan moved. There are actions that take 5 seconds and feel, to the person performing them, like they take no time at all. There are actions that take 5 seconds and feel, to everyone watching, like they happened between one blink and the next. What Ethan Cole did fell into both categories simultaneously. He came from the man's left. The pocket with the moving hand was on the right, which meant the right arm was the priority, but the left side was where he could close distance without triggering the instinctive recoil that a frontal approach would generate. He was within arm's reach before the man's peripheral vision processed the approach as a threat rather than passing foot traffic. When the man began to turn, when the brain finally caught up to the body's warning signal, Ethan was already past the point where turning would help. His left hand found the man's right wrist inside the pocket, not grabbing, controlling. Thumb pressure at a specific point above the carpals, redirecting the grip rather than fighting it. His right forearm came across the man's shoulders from behind, pressure at the shoulder joint, leveraging downward. The man went to his knees. It was not violent in the way that word conjures. There was no impact against a wall, no exchange of blows, no sound beyond a sharp exhalation and the small noise of a knee hitting polished floor. It was precise in the way that a surgeon's incision is precise, the minimum necessary force applied to the exact right point to produce a specific result. The crowd saw a man go down. They didn't see why. They didn't see the approach, the wrist control, the leveraged shoulder. They saw a gray-hooded man suddenly on the floor, and another man kneeling behind him with a hand on his arm. And the tableau made no immediate sense to them because it had happened too quickly to build narrative around. For a moment, no one moved. Ethan kept the man's right hand controlled and used his free hand to open the hoodie pocket from outside, letting the object inside become visible without touching it further. The handle of a compact semi-automatic pistol, gray polymer frame, spare and functional, appeared through the stretched fabric of the pocket. The crowd moved then, not in panic in the sudden, collective inhale of people who have just understood the sentence after the fact and are still catching up to their own fear. A woman grabbed her child. 2 men stood up from their tables. Someone said, "Oh God," and someone else said, "Call someone," and someone dropped a tray. Ethan held his position. The man on the ground had stopped struggling. When the leverage is correct and the person applying it knows what they're doing, struggling generally stops quickly because the geometry of joints does not negotiate. Ethan kept his eyes on the room. Lily was at her table. She was watching him. She had not moved. She had not spilled her ice cream. Ava Reynolds was 15 feet away. She had her phone at her side now, and her eyes were very still in the way that people's eyes go still when the body is managing a large amount of information and doesn't want to waste resources on blinking. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not shock, not gratitude. Something closer to recognition, the way you look at something you've read about but are seeing in the real world for the first time. Mark Delaney arrived 4 minutes later with 2 security officers and the expression of a man who had been interrupted from something important and was going to make that clear. He was 45, broad across the shoulders in the way that used to mean something physical and now mostly meant he'd been sitting behind a desk long enough to spread. He wore the Westfield Meridian security director's lanyard like a credential, and he moved through the parted crowd with the gait of a man who expected the parting to happen and was annoyed when it didn't happen fast enough. He looked at the man on the ground. He looked at Ethan. He made a quick decision based on available data, which is what people with authority tend to do when they haven't been present for the context. "Sir, I need you to stand up and step back. Both of you." Ethan looked at him. "Check his pocket. Sir, right hoodie pocket." Before anyone moves, Mark's jaw tightened. He did not enjoy being told what to do by civilians in his mall, particularly civilians who were kneeling on the floor in a way that suggested they thought they were in charge of a situation that Mark Delaney was quite certain he was in charge of. "Let me see some ID," Mark said. "Check the pocket." One of the security officers, younger, less invested in the hierarchy, leaned forward and looked at the visible fabric, at the shape pressing against it, and said, "Mark," in a tone that communicated several things at once. Mark looked. The air changed in the way air changes when a room full of people all update their understanding of what's happening simultaneously. "He has a gun," the younger officer said, which was unnecessary but apparently felt important to say aloud. Mark didn't respond immediately. He was recalibrating. And recalibration is not a comfortable process for men who've spent 15 years being certain. Ava stepped forward. She'd stayed outside the immediate radius, giving the situation space to resolve. But she moved now with the directness of someone who had been waiting for the correct moment. The man in the hoodie was standing in a fixed position for approximately 15 minutes, with his dominant hand secured in his right pocket, she said, in the clear, moderate tone she used for board presentations when the audience needed to catch up quickly. He was using a scan pattern, inconsistent with casual presence. "I flagged it to my assistant and was attempting to signal mall security when this man intervened." She paused. He intervened correctly. Mark looked at her, looked at Ethan, looked at the man still on the floor. "Ma'am, how do you know?" "I spent 6 years in security architecture consulting," Ava said. "And I'd appreciate it if someone called the police before we continue discussing procedure." The younger officer was already on his radio. Mark stood very still for a moment, holding the particular silence of a man who has just realized that the story he walked into is not the story he thought it was, and who is now calculating how to have been correct anyway. Ethan released the man on the floor carefully, with control, and stood. He looked at Mark without expression. He looked at Ava for 1 second. Something passed between them again, not the urgent exchange from above the food court, but something quieter. An acknowledgement. She gave the smallest nod, barely visible. He walked back to Lily's table. She had finished her ice cream. She was watching him with the eyes she'd inherited. "Done?" she said. "Done," he said. He picked up his jacket from the chair. "Let's go." They were gone before the police arrived. Not running, not hiding. Ethan simply walked Lily toward the north parking structure at the pace of a father and daughter who have finished their shopping. And because nothing in his bearing suggested urgency or guilt or anything other than the ordinary conclusion of an ordinary afternoon, no one stopped him. Mark Delaney gave a description to the responding officers that was accurate in all the wrong ways. Tall, dark jacket, 30s, brown hair. In a mall of 400 people, that description belonged to at least 8 of them. Ava watched him go. She was still standing near the cordoned-off area when she watched the man in the dark jacket disappear into the movement of the crowd, with his daughter's yellow coat visible for a moment, and then not visible at all, and she felt something she couldn't immediately name. Not quite frustration, not quite admiration. Something that existed in the space between. She asked the security officer to pull the relevant camera footage. She had the credentials to request it. Her company held the security consulting contract for 3 of the mall's anchor tenants. The footage was both illuminating and baffling. The angle that should have caught Ethan's approach most clearly, the camera above the Sparrow counter, had the 15-degree blind spot she hadn't known about. He'd moved through it, not by accident. By design. On the footage that did catch him, what was visible was the result. A man on the floor, controlled, the approach already completed. The technique was visible for anyone who knew what they were looking at. Ava knew what she was looking at. She'd reviewed enough physical security assessments to recognize the mechanics. The wrist control, the shoulder leverage, the precise application of minimum necessary force. This was not a man who'd taken a self-defense class. This was not a man with a background in recreational martial arts or police academy training. This was institutional-level operational knowledge. The kind built over years in environments where mistakes had consequences that didn't allow for second attempts. She ran a quiet search through her professional contacts over the following 2 days. Not law enforcement channels. She had enough experience to know that if this man had wanted to be in law enforcement channels, he already would be. He would have stayed. He would have given a statement. He would have let the responding officers photograph his ID and taken the obligatory handshakes from the mall manager and perhaps accepted a coupon for a free lunch that he wouldn't use. He had done none of those things. He had collected his daughter and walked away through the crowd with the ease of someone for whom disappearing was as natural as breathing, and the combination of those 2 facts, the skill on display and the immediate vanishing, told a particular kind of story. She used the network of people she'd spent 6 years building in the security consulting world, people who occasionally knew things about other people in careful, deniable ways. She called 4 of them over the course of 2 days. 3 of them said variations of, "I'm not sure who you mean," with the specific cadence of people who were entirely sure. The 4th, a retired federal contractor named Bridget Marsh, who now consulted on private security audits out of a small office in Denver, was quiet for a long time before she said, "Why are you asking about this?" "Professional curiosity," Ava said. "Ava." Bridget's voice was measured. "Some professional curiosity is worth having. Some isn't. I'd leave this particular thread alone. Is that advice or information?" Another pause. "It's both," Bridget said, and changed the subject. What Ava was able to confirm through other means was notable primarily for what was missing. There was a name attached to an individual with Ethan Cole's general description and skill profile. But the file had gaps in it that were themselves a kind of information. 6 years in the middle of a career, no employer records, no tax filings under a standard social security number, no address history during that period. Then a reappearance, a lease signed, a school enrollment, a part-time bakery position as clean and ordinary as if the previous 6 years had simply not occurred. People with gaps like that in their professional history had chosen to have those gaps, and people who chose those gaps had, at some point, belonged to institutions that preferred their personnel to exist in official records as little as possible. She found, through a different thread, that an Ethan Cole lived 12 minutes from the mall. that he had a daughter named Lily enrolled in second grade at Riverside Elementary, that he worked, 3 days a week, at a small bakery called Carver and Sons on Pembroke Street. The daughter had no mother listed on any accessible record. Ethan had been her sole parent since she was 2 years old, which meant Lily had spent her entire conscious life with only him, which explained. Ava thought why the child had the particular gravity she did, the sense of having been treated consistently as a full person rather than a small one. She sat with that information for 4 days before she decided what to do with it. She was honest with herself during those 4 days about what she was doing. She was not running an investigation. She was not conducting professional due diligence. She was a person who had seen something she did not have a category for and could not stop thinking about, and she was deciding whether to do something about that or file it neatly into the folder of interesting experiences and move on. She drove to Pembroke Street on a Wednesday morning and told herself she was in the neighborhood for a different reason, which was not true, and which she recognized was not true, approximately 3 minutes before she walked through the door of Carver and Sons. Carver and Sons was the kind of establishment that had survived 3 decades in the same location by making excellent coffee and not trying too hard about anything else. The interior was warm in the specific way of places that haven't been renovated to look warm, worn wooden tables, a chalkboard menu that had been erased and rewritten so many times the chalk dust had become part of the board itself, the smell of butter, and something with cardamom. Ethan was behind the counter when Ava walked in. He saw her before the door fully opened. She registered it in the slight adjustment of his posture. Not much, barely perceptible. But she was looking for it. She ordered a coffee she didn't need and stood at the counter while he made it. And neither of them spoke about the mall or the man in the gray hoodie or any of what had happened 5 days ago. I didn't expect this, she said finally. The coffee's good, he said. I meant you. He set the cup down. He had the particular quality of stillness that some people mistake for coldness because they've never encountered a person who's simply fully inside their own body, not leaking attention everywhere. How's your daughter? She asked. Something shifted, very slightly. She's fine. She seemed. Ava paused, choosing the word. Steady. She is. The door opened behind her, and Lily came in, still in the yellow toggle coat. Apparently coming from somewhere nearby after school, Ava guessed, the timing right for it. She stopped when she saw Ava, and the recognition was immediate and complete in the way children's recognition often is, uncomplicated by the self-consciousness adults layer over it. You were upstairs, Lily said. I was, Ava said. Lily looked at her father, then back at Ava. She was making some calculation that Ava couldn't quite read, but the result seemed to be positive, because she climbed onto a stool at the counter and said, Do you know sign language? I do, Ava said. I've been learning, Lily said. Dad taught me a little, but he says he only knows enough to get by. She signed, slowly, and with great concentration. Hello. My name is Lily, Ava signed back fluently. Hello, Lily. Your signing is very good. Lily's face opened up completely. She said, My signing is good, she told her father. I heard, Ethan said. You understood it? Some of it. Lily turned back to Ava, with the expression of someone who has just realized they've found a collaborator. Can you teach me more? Ava looked at Ethan. He was watching his daughter with the expression she was beginning to understand was his version of joy, not the surface expression but the thing underneath it, the warmth that lived 3 layers down and was visible only if you knew where to look. Maybe sometime, Ava said. She came back the next Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. They didn't talk about anything significant, at first. She asked about the bakery. He asked briefly, without pressure about her company. Lily drew pictures at a corner table and periodically came over to show them to Ava with the seriousness of an artist presenting work to a patron. Once, on a Tuesday when Lily was at a school event and the bakery was quieter than usual, Ava asked him why the bakery. He was quiet for a moment, rearranging something under the counter. Lily likes it, he said. She comes here after school. It's fixed. She knows where it is. Stable, Ava said. Yeah. And for you? He looked up. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, not guarded exactly, more like careful, the way people are careful with things they don't want to drop. "It's enough," he said. She thought about that on the drive home. It's enough. Not resigned, that wasn't how he'd said it. More like someone who had spent time in places where the calculus of enough was brutally simple, and had come out the other side grateful for the specific version of enough he'd built here. The warm bakery, the fixed point after school, the small girl in the yellow coat. Ava had a company with 47 employees and contracts in 4 states, and a calendar that ran 2 months ahead, and an apartment she'd furnished in a single weekend because she hadn't wanted to spend more time on it. She looked at what Ethan Cole had built carefully, quietly, around his daughter, around this bakery, around the shape of a life that could contain a child and be present for her, and she was aware of something she didn't immediately have words for. The next Tuesday, she brought a sign language dictionary for Lily. Children's edition. Organized by category. Lily received it with the solemnity of someone accepting a meaningful commission, and immediately began reading it at her table, with her coffee cooling untouched beside her. Ethan watched this. Then he looked at Ava. He didn't say anything. She looked away first, which was unusual for her. One of Lily's drawings left on the counter one afternoon without ceremony. The way Lily left things was a figure in a dark jacket, standing between a group of smaller figures and something large and threatening rendered in red crayon. Next to the figure in the dark jacket was a smaller figure. And beside that, slightly separated, a third figure with yellow hair. "Is that your dad?" Ava asked, when Lily showed her. "Yes," Lily said. "He's always in front." Ava looked up. Ethan had his back to them, restocking the pastry case. "Yes," Ava said quietly. "He is." She took the drawing home. She didn't tell Lily she was doing it. But Lily watched her fold it carefully and put it in her bag. And the child's expression said that this was exactly what she'd intended. On the 9th day after the incident, Ava's head of IT security called her at 6 a.m. His name was Patrick Suarez, and he did not call at 6 a.m. unless something was genuinely wrong, so she answered before the second ring. "Someone tried to access your personal calendar and your home network authentication last night," he said. "Not through the company system. Through your personal accounts. Did they get in?" "No." But whoever it was knew which accounts to try and in what order. This wasn't random credential stuffing. This was targeted reconnaissance. "Ava setup. The man they arrested at Westfield," she said. "Have you seen anything come out of the police inquiry?" "That's why I'm calling," Patrick said. "He's not talking. But one of my contacts in the investigative community flagged something. The gun he was carrying, serial number removal was professional grade, and there's a suggestion not confirmed. Still at the inference stage that he wasn't acting alone." Ava was already moving to her laptop. "Tell me about the mall's internal security structure," she said. "That's the other thing," Patrick said, and his voice shifted in a way that meant the next information was worse than the first. "The blind spot on that Sparrow camera? It was created deliberately. Someone with access to the security management system made a configuration change 8 weeks ago. The camera wasn't misaligned accidentally. There was a pause in which Ava recalibrated several things at once. "Someone inside the mall's security system," she said. "That's what the data suggests." She thought about Mark Delaney, about the 15-year career, the confident stride, the 4-minute response time to a code that should have generated a 2-minute response, about the way he'd arrived and immediately tried to make Ethan the problem. "I need everything you can pull on the mall's security vendor contracts and access logs," she said. "And Patrick, don't go through any channel that touches Westfield's internal system. External only." "Understood, Ava," he paused. "Be careful with your location data for a while." She hung up. She sat for a moment in the early dark of her apartment, with the particular clarity that descends when you've been operating at normal alertness and something has moved you to a higher level. She thought about Ethan Cole, about the camera blind spot he'd moved through as though he already knew it was there, about the professional gaps in a file that wasn't supposed to exist. She picked up her phone. She didn't have his number. She had a bakery address and a school. She drove to Carver and Sons. He was already there. He looked at her when she came through the door, and then looked more carefully, in the way that people who know how to read threat levels in a person's posture read threat levels. "Tell me," he said. She told him. He didn't react with visible alarm, which she'd expected. He listened with the particular quality of someone who is receiving information and filing it in the correct compartments while she's still speaking. When she finished, he said, "The camera configuration. When was the access log last audited? That's what I need to find out." "Don't audit it yourself," he said. "If someone inside the system knows you're looking, you'll confirm what they're trying to find out, which is whether I can identify them." "You can identify them," he said. "You already know more than they think you do. The question is whether you move on it before they move on you." She looked at him. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. He picked up a coffee cup, held it, didn't drink. "Different context," he said, "but the same kind of problem." A pause that contained several things, neither of them said. "Lily's at school until 3, he said finally. "Walk me through what your IT director said." "All of it." They spent 4 hours at a corner table in Carver and Sons with the door locked and the closed sign showing, working through what Ava had and what she needed. Ethan didn't have a laptop. He used Ava's, navigating through the security access logs she'd pulled through Patrick's external channels with the ease of someone for whom this type of data was a native language. He moved through it without explanation, and Ava watched the pattern emerge in the data as he pointed things out. Access timestamps that clustered around off hours, configuration changes made through a user account that had no legitimate reason to touch camera management settings, a door sensor in the eastern corridor that had been switched to non-reporting status for 40 minutes on the morning of the incident. He had a route in, Ethan said, not improvised, pre-planned. Someone inside helped him establish entry and manage the response window. The camera blind spot was the response management, Ava said, and the door sensor was the entry management. He traced back through the access logs. This account. He indicated a user ID. It has administrator privileges on the security management system, but it's not a security role. Look at the job function. Ava looked. Operations and vendor liaison. Who holds that role? She checked the organizational chart she'd requested from Westfield's management company that morning under a business pretext. The name attached to the user ID was Carl Whitmore, a mid-level operations coordinator who, according to his personnel file, had been managing vendor access and onboarding for 4 years. Not Mark Delaney. The director wasn't the inside contact, Ethan said. No, Ava said. He was just incompetent. Ethan almost smiled again. It reached his eyes this time, briefly. They pieced together the rest of it over the following 2 hours. Carl Whitmore had been the access point. The larger architecture of what was being planned, the reason the man in the gray hoodie had been positioned where he was, the reason Ava had been surveilled afterward remained at the inference level, but the shape of it was becoming clearer. Ava's company held security consulting contracts that gave her access to systems and client data that someone wanted access to. The operation at the mall had not been random. She was the target. The man in gray had been meant to create a crisis that generated chaos. And in that chaos, someone was supposed to have access to her. For what, exactly, she didn't know yet. But she knew enough. She called Patrick and gave him Carl Whitmore's name and the specific access logs. She told him to package it for law enforcement through the correct external channels, bypassing anything that touched Westfield's internal infrastructure. Then she sat back and looked at Ethan. "There's a board meeting on Friday," she said. "I was planning to announce a new security partnership for 3 of our client accounts." "Postpone it," he said. "If I postpone it, whoever is watching will know I know." "Yes," he said. "So postpone it strategically. Postpone it for a reason that also tells them something else." She thought about that. "A reason that makes them think I'm moving in a direction I'm not moving." "You're good at this," he said. It wasn't flattery. It was the same way he'd say the coffee's good observation. Stated cleanly. "So are you," she said. Neither of them elaborated. On Friday, at 11 in the morning, Carl Whitmore was escorted from Westfield Meridian's operations center by 2 federal investigators. The board meeting was postponed because of a scheduling conflict with a key client, which Ava's communications team announced via the appropriate channels. By the time anyone was positioned to act on the postponement, the case against Whitmore had generated 3 additional names and a thread that law enforcement was pursuing through proper channels. The man in the gray hoodie remained in custody, still not talking, but the architecture around him had begun to collapse. Ava was in her office when Patrick called to tell her the federal case was formally opened. She looked out her window at the city below and allowed herself, for 30 seconds, the particular satisfaction of a problem solved before it became catastrophic. Then she thought about a bakery on Pembroke Street. 3 weeks later, Ava's security architecture firm sent a formal proposal to Westfield Meridian's management company. It was a thorough proposal, professionally presented, detailing significant gaps in the mall's existing security infrastructure and offering a comprehensive audit and remediation plan. The cover letter was signed by Ava Reynolds, CEO. Mark Delaney had been moved to a different role. The new director of security who reviewed the proposal was someone who had not been present on the afternoon in question and had no investment in how it had unfolded. He approved the audit within a week. Ava didn't see Ethan during that period. She told herself this was appropriate. The situation had resolved. The professional thread had concluded. And anything further was a choice that deserved to be made deliberately rather than by default. She was not good at deliberate decisions in her personal life. She was exceptional at them in her professional life, and the spillover was imperfect. On a Tuesday morning in mid-December, when the city had the particular quality of early winter light that makes everything look cleaned, she drove to Pembroke Street. She had no specific reason, or she had several specific reasons that she was choosing not to examine too closely. She had spent 3 weeks being extraordinarily disciplined about the professional dimensions of everything that had happened, and she had done it well. The contract was won, the case was moving through proper channels. Her company's clients were protected. She had been excellent at all of it. The personal dimensions she had set carefully to the side. The way you set something fragile on a high shelf while you're doing work that requires both hands. The sign in the window of Carver & Sons said open. She pushed through the door. Ethan was at the counter. Lily was at the corner table, working on something homework, or one of her drawings. The dedication was indistinguishable between the two. Lily looked up first. Her face did the thing that 7-year-old faces do when they see someone they've decided they like, the immediate, uncomplicated opening. No performance. Nothing held in reserve. You came back, she said. I came back, Ava said. She looked at Ethan. He was looking at her with the expression she'd learned to read the surface stillness and the warmth 3 layers down, both of them visible now to her, though she suspected not to many other people. He had the air of someone who had been expecting her and had decided to allow himself to have been expecting her, which was, she understood, its own kind of courage for a man who kept most things close. Coffee? He said. Please. She sat at the counter while he made it. The bakery was warm. Outside, the December light made the street look like something from a photograph. Lily had resumed her work at the table and was narrating it quietly to herself, a habit Ava had already catalogued as one of her favorite things about the child. I got the Westfield contract, Ava said. I saw the announcement, Ethan said. You follow industry news? I follow things that matter. She looked at him. He placed the coffee in front of her. Their eyes met for a moment in the particular way they'd been meeting since the first time, across 30 feet of air in a crowded food court. When he'd seen her sign and understood what it meant and moved. The offer I made you, she said. The consulting position. Still no, he said. I know, she said. I wasn't going to make it again. He nodded. Waited. I was going to make a different offer, she said. A pause. The coffee was excellent. She hadn't touched it yet. Ask me, he said. Saturday, she said. Lily mentioned she wants to learn more sign language. I know someone who teaches a beginner's workshop on Saturday mornings. It runs 2 hours. After that, there's a good diner 3 blocks from the workshop location. She paused. The pancakes are significant. Ethan was quiet for a moment. She had learned, in the weeks of Tuesday mornings, that his silences were not hesitation. They were consideration, and the difference mattered. Lily, he said, without raising his voice. Lily looked up from her corner. Saturday, he said. Sign language workshop. You interested? Lily put down her pencil with the seriousness of someone receiving important intelligence. Is Ava teaching it? No, Ava said. But I'll be there. Lily considered this for approximately 3 seconds. Yes, she said, and picked her pencil back up. Ethan looked at Ava. She looked back at him. Saturday, he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a beginning that announced itself with any fanfare or romantic orchestration. It was simply two people who had recognized something in each other from 30 feet away and a floor apart, who had been moving carefully and without hurry toward the same small table. Ava picked up her coffee. Outside, the December light lay clean and cold on Pembroke Street, and inside the warm bakery, a little girl in a yellow toggle coat was drawing a picture of 3 figures standing close together, which she would give to Ava on Saturday morning without ceremony, the way children give gifts completely, and without keeping anything back. The third figure in the drawing had yellow hair and stood a little separated from the other two, but not far. Just close enough. Lily had drawn a single line connecting all 3 of them at the hand's simple crayon, applied with great care, and she had colored it the same yellow as her coat. When Ava received it that Saturday, she folded it the same way she'd folded the first one. She put it in her bag. She did not explain why. Some things don't require explanation. They only require the recognition that they matter. Held quietly, without making it into something larger than it is. The bakery was warm. The coffee was good. Lily was already asking Ava how to sign Saturday before they'd even finished their drinks. Outside, the year turned slowly toward winter, and the light on Pembroke Street was the color of something beginning.